So I was starting to think that maybe I had overpromised myself when I decided I would plant a tree every day this year, because, you know, there's 10 acres that I can plant on, and large parts of that are taken up with things where people wouldn't like me to put a tree. Like, for example, I'm not sure people would be thrilled if I planted a tree in the middle of the living room. Then I went north for a couple of weeks, and I saw some of the thicket vegetation and some of the riverine forests and some of the just sort of dry evergreen forests, and let me tell you, there is a long way I can go, even with some of the trees that are around here, before the density is unmanageable. And bearing in mind that was lower altitude and denser vegetation, so it's getting less light inherently because there's more atmosphere for the light to travel through, and yet it was happy denser. And the rainfall up there isn't all that much more than here. In parts of the north it is, but in the area where I was, not really. So hopefully I can carry on with this. But with that in mind, I will be planting subcanopy trees today, for the 2 days I am making up for because I was away. So for what should have been day 153, I think, we're going to be planting Euphorbia bicompacta, which is an East African Euphorbia. It should get to sort of 7 or 8 meters in the ideal conditions, I think. This probably won't get to that because I will probably be propagating it from cutting. Unusually, it does perk up as soon as it starts to produce a root as a cutting, so I thought this would be much more rooted than it actually was. It does have a little root nub in there, but the leaves had started turning upwards, so I thought, yeah, the roots had started developing well. Whereas something like a yucca, by the time it starts perking up, it's usually got a healthy root system down there, not just a nubbin. But anyway, that will be going in with a Dracaena fragrans as its little piece of shelter. That will be eventually coming out, so once this has sort of grown a bit and the Euphorbia is standing by itself and eventually is becoming the subcanopy to some Carya nyassica, which is one of the mahoganies that I have around here, then the Dracaena will eventually be chopped down to the base, and the parts that are chopped off will be planted elsewhere or potentially given away in exchange for another plant that I want. We will find out in the quite distant future, I suspect. But anyway, in with that as well, we're going to be putting a nice little piece of Alocameroni, which should be a nice little succulent, sort of prickly barrier against anything that might want to nibble on the Euphorbia, which is not many things, to be honest. It doesn't really need much protection in that sense. And just to be on the safe side, we're going to also add something almost as toxic, but in a very different way to the Euphorbia, which is going to be the Calico pinnata. This is a nice little clump that I uprooted. It was growing somewhere that I really didn't need it to. This is actually very happy in shade, although a lot of the calicos really like full sun. This one will do very well in full sun, but it will also become incredibly aggressive in shade and need an awful lot of cutting back, which is what has happened here, I guess. So for part 2 today, we're going with Eugenia uniflora, which is the Suriname cherry, which is very much a standard for me as far as sort of subcanopy trees go. Primarily, we already have this growing as a hedge, so all the ones you see me planting this year have been ones that have been grown from seeds from that hedge, apart from some that have been grown from seeds from a tree that was grown from a seed from that hedge. And it does seem to fruit much more vigorously as a tree than it does as a hedge, so hopefully it will be quite productive when it grows up. This will be in the subcanopy of things like one of the Terminalia manteli and the big kapok tree, who is currently very much in the way of dormant. But hopefully will eventually be shooting up to higher than any other tree we have growing here. In fact, probably higher than any tree I would choose to plant here, because the eucalyptus can get taller, but I will not be planting eucalyptus. Anyway, in with our little Eugenia, we are going to be planting a nice piece of Dracaena studinary that had been starting to settle into a different spot, not as one of my trees this year, just as a piece that I'd put in off camera, but then mole rats ate the base, so I'm using it as a marker here. If it roots, great. If it doesn't, then I will take it away once the Eugenia is big enough and rooted in pot, and then it can be planted somewhere else, or again, traded away. We're also going to be putting in another piece of Alocameroni, as this will want a succulent prickly barrier to prevent fire and herbivores in the longer run. And then we're going to be putting in as a toxic barrier some Calico prolifera, which I always feel is rather more pinnate than Calico pinnata, which is itself rather more prolific than Calico prolifera. That should be everything for tonight, so thank you very much for watching. I hope you have enjoyed it, and if you hadn't, thank you for watching anyway. Please tune in again tomorrow. I will be planting something different, hopefully. I am going into town tomorrow. Whether I have time to get anything interesting while I'm there will be another question, but we'll see.